I want to welcome everyone to the Sea Ranch Forum's interviews of the three candidates for the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office in the June 2022 primary election. The Sea Ranch Forum started in 1974 and has served as an informal town hall to discuss major issues of concern to Sea Ranch members and to the greater coastal community. It is independent of the Sea Ranch Association and its board of directors. My guest today is Eddie Engram. Assistant Sheriff Eddie Engram began his career in the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office in 2000 and moved to the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office in 2002, rising through the ranks and eventually promoted to the number 2 spot in the Sheriff's Office. Along the way, Assistant Sheriff Engram has served as a domestic violence, sexual assault detective, internal affairs investigator, and field training officer. Eddie was the head of the Professional Standards Bureau, including internal affairs and training. As the field services captain, Eddie led and oversaw the entirety of the field services division, which includes all patrol bureau, dispatch, and court security. His experience in the law enforcement division has placed him in charge of managing fire response during most of the major wildfires since 2017. Upon promotion to assistant sheriff, Engram's purview expanded to include the detention division and all detention-related services, managing a $74 million annual budget, an average daily population of 700 inmates, and approximately 300 sheriff's office employees. Assistant Sheriff Engram is a recipient of the Sheriff's Office Distinguished Service Award and a Gold Medal of Valor. He holds a bachelor's degree in criminal justice management. Okay, now it's your turn to give us an opening statement.
Hi, thank you for having me. So I've been with the Sheriff's Office 20 years, and you covered a little bit of my experience. The primary job of the sheriff is to keep people safe. That's keeping people safe with our patrol division. That's also keeping people safe during wildfires and emergencies. And it also extends to keeping people safe within our detention facilities. Once individuals are booked into our detention facilities, they become our responsibility. It's our responsibility to feed them, to clothe them, to educate them, and to provide them medical and mental health services. So I believe that I have the overall experience to do all of those things. The Sheriff's Office is a unique organization in that it has the law enforcement side and it has the detention side. And I'm unique among Sheriff's Office staff and management in that I've held management positions on the law enforcement side as well as the detention side. So I believe overall I'm the most qualified candidate for sheriff, and I look forward to your questions.
Okay, great. So now I'm going to share my screen. And start the slideshow. Okay, so the Sea Ranch is in Zone 1, which has 3 resident coastal deputies. Our resident deputy has a beat that covers approximately 500 square miles, and his only partner is a canine. The other 2 resident deputies, one is in Timber Cove and the other is in Bodega Bay. So can you tell me, as assistant sheriff, about the unique challenges in staffing deputies in Zone 1 on the coast?
I think it has always been a unique challenge in staffing deputies there, and I think that's where the resident program came out of. We have our nearest substation is in Guerneville, and because of that, it has always been difficult to staff those areas. And so the rather unique idea of resident deputies, that's where it arose from. And the Sheriff's Office, Sonoma County Sheriff's Office, isn't unique in staffing resident deputies. You find this in rural counties where the population is spread out, the county is rural, and there may be fewer residents to serve. And so to best serve those residents, we utilize the rural deputies. We use the resident deputies. Though they are alone and with the canine, we do have the ability, especially with the use of Henry One, to get them resources in a relatively quick time based on where they are located. Also, the resident deputies can back each other up. And in certain locations within Zone 1, there are ways to have deputies respond from other areas, such as from Zone 2 via Lake Sonoma and and also the river deputies on 116, and from Zone 4 and Zone 5 on the south coast from deputies who patrol in that zone. So those are the ways that we can supplement the deputy sheriffs who work there when needed.
So my second question is, what do you consider to be an acceptable response time for emergency calls to the sheriff's department?
You know, I think ideally you would like the emergency response times to be the same in every zone. However, we just know that that's not true. The response time in Zone 3, which is the 101 corridor, Santa Rosa, is a shorter response time than it would be in Zone 2 or Zone 1, depending where the location is. So to put an overall number on what that response time is really difficult depending on where that situation is. Ideally, we would like it to be lower as opposed to higher.
Yeah, so I'm hearing feedback and I don't know where that's coming from. This is from the Santa Rosa Police Department, which is not exactly the same. And this is a bit dated, but the technology of the cars and the geography hasn't changed that much. But this is Santa Rosa Police Department and their response time, just to get an idea where they show the different priorities, and wanted to use that as a comparison. So our current resident deputy works a day shift for 5 days a week and then is on call for what should be his off hours. If he is not available, the next resident deputy is in Timber Cove, a half-hour away, then one in Bodega Bay, an hour away. If none of the resident deputies are available, then the call is directed for a deputy from the Guerneville substation, and the response then can be upwards of an hour and a half. If your family had an emergency and called for law enforcement, do you think a response time measured in hours and not minutes would be acceptable?
I don't think it's ideal. I think that what you have to do is take the understanding of the geography of the county, the roadways and the access to individuals, and the reality of the staffing of the sheriff's office. That it really isn't feasible to place a substation on the north coast, a substation on the central coast, and a substation on the south coast. That's the financial reality that we live with. Having unlimited resources, then I think that would be something that would be available to do. And I don't think that any candidate can promise to put a substation on the coast.
I wasn't calling for a substation. So
no, I wasn't. I wasn't saying that you were calling for a substation. What I was explaining is the reality of staffing, geography, and the overall challenges in providing services to rural areas, and those are the challenges that we have.
So my next question goes along with this. I consider law enforcement to be similar to other emergency services, such as fire departments, ambulances, and hospitals that are on duty 24/7 and require coverage even on weekends, holidays, and midnights. The Sea Ranch has our own security department, and we have officers working 7 days a week, but are not on duty for 24 hours. And while they are helpful assisting residents, they are not law enforcement officers. A few months ago, when all 3 coastal deputies were away from their posts for training in Santa Rosa, there were not replacement deputies on duty in the coastal zone ready to respond to emergencies. So one of our security officers responded to a domestic violence call, which is beyond their scope of duty. Why should coastal residents not deserve to have consistent, reliable coverage for law enforcement at all times, as the residents in the 101 corridor expect?
I don't think that it is acceptable for you to not have consistent and reliable service. And part of the resident program is for you to do that. And for the resident deputy is on call and they're paid 24 hours of the day. That is the intent and the purpose of the resident deputy. And I don't think that it's acceptable that all 3 resident deputies were off the coast at the same time. That wasn't something that occurred, something that I've ever heard of occurring. And it is something that is surprising to me.
So I was told that weekly they take their canines for canine training and they all go at the same day. So it's likely it was that day.
Okay.
So, okay. Will you commit to having a resident deputy in our district 7 days a week?
I can't make that commitment.
Okay.
The reality is that the budget and the allocations of deputy sheriffs are allocated by the Board of Supervisors. I can advocate for that with the Board of Supervisors for increased positions. As we have advocated for increased supervision, we asked the board for 2 additional sergeants last year for increasing our supervision of our deputy sheriffs, and that request was denied. So I can advocate for that. I can commit to advocate for that, but I cannot commit to adding positions.
Okay, so in the 2020 budget cycle, talking about budgets, Sheriff Essick was given a directive by the Board of Supervisors to cut $14.2 million from the department's budget. Essick threatened closing both the Sonoma Valley and Guerneville substations. Tell me how the closure of the Guerneville substation would impact response times to the coast if we do not have a resident deputy in our district 7 days a week.
I think that would be a drastic cut in public safety. And I think that it's important to note that it wasn't a threat. It's the reality of the budget situation that we were in. The cuts to the substation weren't cuts that they would have closed the substation, then it would have accounted for 4 deputy sheriff positions and 1 sergeant position. And the deputies responding to the deputies patrolling the Guerneville area would have responded out of our main office as opposed to having the substation there. That cut to the substation represented $2.1 million. The cut would have been the same to the Sonoma Valley substation of $2.1 million. And Henry 1 is a $2.5 million cut. So that's where those cuts end up. Again, the sheriff's office does not, the sheriff does not control the budget. He works with the budget that he's been given with. And I think that it's important to note that over the past, and this is not something that I think any member of the sheriff's office is happy with, but over the past 10 years, the sheriff's office has lost 80 allocated positions, 40 of those being deputy sheriff positions. So the budget reality is not something that we are happy with. We've lost our, when we make budget cuts, we try not to impact directly public safety. So when someone calls a deputy, that a deputy arrives. And in doing that, of the 40 positions we've lost our narcotics unit, we've lost our gang unit, we've lost our community-oriented policing unit, and we've lost our intelligence unit. So those are cuts that have taken place over the past few years that the residents of Sonoma County haven't seen because the patrol on the street that the average person sees really hasn't been impacted. But as we continue to move forward and continue to have these cuts to budget, at some point it's going to be where the public does notice it. And it's something that I'm very concerned with. And it's something that I would advocate for with the Board of Supervisors to continue funding at least baseline services where we are with the sheriff's office.
So my question was, how will it impact response times?
Right. And I think I started the answer with that it would drastically increase response time.
Okay, that's what I was looking for. Okay, so my second question or next question, I think you kind of added that I said, would you commit to supporting the Guerneville substation and not threaten its continued existence should there be future budgetary shortfalls?
And I think I answered part of that question is that it's not a threat. The sheriff's office has been cut several years over to the point to where it is very difficult for us to continue to to provide the services that we have. And so if the cuts have to come from somewhere, and now we're at the point to where the cuts going to come from. Depending on the projected cut number is, there's a possibility of cutting a violent crimes detective or a domestic violence detective. But depending on where that cut is, what that budget cut number is, it has to come from somewhere. The average deputy sheriff cost is about $250,000. So
Okay.
it depends on really where the cut is.
So you can't commit. Okay.
I can commit to advocate for the substation keep being open, but I don't think that realistically any candidate can commit to keeping the substation open if tomorrow the board says that there needs to be an $8 million cut to the sheriff's office. There's no candidate who could realistically, they could promise that, but it is not a realistic promise. And I don't want to make unrealistic promises to people.
Okay, so in that same vein, in that same budget cycle, Sheriff Essick also proposed cutting the helicopter known as Henry I, recently purchased by the county in 2018 for $5.5 million. This helicopter is vital in the rural and less accessible portions of Sonoma County, as at times it can provide the only rapid response option. It can be a lifesaver if someone loses control of their vehicle on Highway 1. The Press Democrat attributed Essick with saying, quote, "Although the helicopter is great, it's a force multiplier. It's also very expensive, and it's a luxury most law enforcement agencies do not have, particularly law enforcement agencies our size," unquote. Henry I is needed for both rescue and firefighting, which is increasingly necessary due to climate change and recent out-of-control wildfires in many different parts of our county. Will you commit your permanent support for Henry I?
I don't think that anyone has taken, I will commit my permanent support for Henry I. I don't think that anyone has had any issues with Henry I, but the budgetary realities, which we've talked about, Henry I is a $2.5 million program representing approximately 10 deputy sheriffs. So again, not having full control of our budget and being tasked with working within the budget that is given to us, if it comes down to removing 10 deputy sheriffs from the street or removing Henry I, I don't know what the other option would be.
Okay. So I'm going to show something nice now. Okay. Okay. Have you seen the documentary film 3 Seconds in October?
No, I haven't.
Okay. That movie details not only the killing of 13-year-old Andy Lopez by Sonoma County Sheriff's Deputy Eric Gelhaus, but also other human rights abuses by the Sheriff's Office, such as the now banned practice of yard counseling by deputies at the county jail that led to a $1.7 million settlement. It will be re-airing on our local PBS station, KRCB, on May 19th at 10 p.m. I recommend that you watch the rebroadcast and then post your reactions to viewing the movie on your website. So, okay, and I wanted to know, knowing that you've been overseeing the jail, were you involved in the oversight of the jail during that time when the yard counseling abuses led to a $1.7 million settlement against the county?
No, I wasn't. I believe that happened in either 2017 or 18. I didn't take over the jail until 2020.
Okay. So in the Kincaid fire, you oversaw the county's response and evacuation. And I want to thank you for the many sleepless nights you endured on all of our behalf. Okay. And I want to know, how will emergency evacuations be handled when the inevitable significant wildfire affects the areas of Annapolis, Sea Ranch, or Timber Cove areas? Highway 1, either north or southbound, would soon become clogged with vehicles trying to evacuate. And if both lanes were used by people going in one direction, it would complicate the arrival of emergency response vehicles. Would you suggest some residents try to shelter on a beach to avoid the oncoming flames and then wait for assistance by the American Red Cross? Coastal residents do not want to perish like many people did in the Paradise Fire by being stuck in a traffic jam trying to escape from an oncoming wildfire.
So I think that when it comes to evacuations, there have been a couple of things that we've done and that we've learned from both Tubbs and Kincaid. I think primarily one of those things is our new evacuation zone maps, which break our evacuation zones down into smaller, manageable groups and along well, which some would consider major arteries, but some may not consider them major arteries. But
Highway 1 is
the best artery we have.
Yeah.
That's probably the best way to do that. And part of that, with the smaller, more manageable zones, not only does it prevent what we had in Kincaid, where essentially the entire coast was evacuated from the west side of 101 to the ocean, but part of that is more of a phased evacuation period that allows for roads to be relatively less traveled than it would be with a larger zone. So you could start by issuing warnings for several zones, orders for one zone, and then allowing for the more free flow of traffic. However, that's really based on the speed of the fire and how it is traveling. So, the infrastructure of our county when it comes to roads, especially when you're traveling east to west, is challenging to say the least. So the evacuation zones and how we have the zones and how we do the evacuations are really our best way to control traffic and move people out of dangerous areas. And we could also utilize law enforcement personnel to help speed that traffic. But there is a critical mass when it comes to traffic, and at some point, you're stuck.
Yeah, I was an evacuee in the Tubbs fire. At the time, we were living in an apartment on Fountain Grove, and we weren't given any alert. We just happened to wake up and realize that everything was on fire around us. And by the time we drove down and saw the round barn on fire, it took us 2 hours to get to Novato, which usually doesn't take that long, but it was clogged. And I just hesitate thinking of how Highway 1 would be.
Right.
And I don't know, should we encounter something where we're self-evacuating because we haven't heard anything because it's just happening now? It's like my husband wants to drive a car onto the Sea Ranch golf course on a fairway so that it won't be by trees and we'll be there. And it's like going, but just wanted to know if you had considered that in your planning, because every district is going to be slightly different. And when you're coming up with Annapolis Road and Stewart's Point, Skaggs Springs Road, those are paved goat paths, and I would trust going on that. So, okay, next. If elected sheriff, you will be Sonoma County's first African-American sheriff and only the second African-American sheriff in California's history. And that would be a groundbreaking achievement. You were also considered to be Sheriff Essex' hand-picked successor, as he has endorsed your candidacy. That endorsement is looked at with skepticism by many in our community who consider you being part of a culture that has been resistant to change. How will you reconcile the hopes of our African-American community in your candidacy with their distrust of the Sheriff's Department due to a history of violence and disrespect?
It really comes down to open and honest communication. I think that if anyone who has spoken to me, I think has completely dismissed that idea of me as a continuation of their negative views of the sheriff's office. I think that if you look at the number of people who have endorsed me, not only the number of people who have endorsed me, but the variation of people who have endorsed me, from one political end of the spectrum to the other. And when you're talking about the sheriff's office and our history with individuals, that's something that's really important, and really one of the things and the reasons why I'm running for sheriff. I don't think that someone can handpick someone to be the sheriff. And I think what that does is a true disservice to the voters of Sonoma County. The voters choose who the sheriff is, not the previous sheriff. and to be honest, no one handpicked Mark Essick either. The previous sheriff did not endorse him. So that the previous sheriff, Sheriff Freitas, actually endorsed Carlos Baserto, who was in the race for a short period of time. All that being said, running for office is an honor. It is something to be involved in the political process, and you really don't know it until you do it. It's been humbling at times, it's been exciting at times, and that sometimes it's been terrifying. But I think that it does a disservice to me as a person to say that someone chose me. No one chose me. No one can choose anyone to do this. It is very hard, not only on the candidate, but on the candidate's family. As far as being the first African-American in Sonoma County to be elected sheriff, or the second in the state, though that also would be an honor, that doesn't define me as a person or a professional in law enforcement, and it never has. I think that my credentials speak for themselves, and when people take a really hard look at my credentials and what I've done something that no one else in this race has done in my career, both on the law side and the detention side and the emergency response side. You'll see that I'm the most qualified candidate. And if you look at other forums that we've had and look at my ideas and the things that I've said, then you'll have a true picture of me as an individual and not someone who works in an organization. Because at the end of the day, I think that most people can look, and at least if they've worked for people, they can look at their boss and say that I'm not my boss. And I can honestly say that.
Okay. Can you give me specifics on how you plan for your time as sheriff that will be different than Sheriff Essick?
Yes. So I think that for me, I think that we do a lot of things well, disaster response and doing the job of being law enforcement. That's something that we do well. I think what we don't do well is communicate and engage with members of our community. And that is really where I see a hole. And it's one of the reasons that really drove me to run for this office. And as sheriff, it would be my commitment that anyone involved in on the management team will be involved in some sort of community group, because if we don't hear what the community is saying, then we're not going to know how to respond to them to provide the best service that we can. What that group is really doesn't matter to me. It could be the Lions, it could be Catholic Charities, it could be any group, but we really need to hear what the community is thinking. I myself have been involved in two groups. I'm on the board of Verity, which is a charity for victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. And I'm also a member of the 100 Black Men of Sonoma County, which is a mentoring group. And I think that that's really important to engage with members of our community to really hear what they're saying and what their needs are. And that's what I would change within our office.
Okay, good. In the Independent Office of Law Enforcement Review and Outreach, IOLARO forum, you were asked about the K-9 program and two recent lawsuits filed against the county due to abusive conduct by deputies using K-9s. While you expressed support for the program, you did not mention their use by those deputies in rural areas. K-9 use by deputies in the coastal region is practiced because otherwise the deputies are solo. They do not have human partners nor timely backup. Having a dog with the deputy is at least some support if someone were to try and attack the deputy. Please expound on this program regarding the benefits for deputies while trying to safeguard the public from possible abusive acts.
You're absolutely correct in that the K-9 deputies the K-9s are valuable to our coast deputies. I don't think it would be possible for them to do their job effectively without having those K-9 partners based on their remote locations. When it comes to the use of the K-9, that's really where the training is really important, and not only the training of the K-9 deputy, but the selection of that K-9 deputy to ensure that they have the correct temperament and the right understanding of when it is appropriate to utilize their dog in the either protection of themselves or others, or in the apprehension of a subject. So that's really where the training and the understanding needs to be in the selection of the canine handler, and the understanding of when it is appropriate to use the canine in the either apprehension of a subject or protection of the handler or others.
Okay, good. Okay, now you mentioned that you're on the board of Verity, our local rape crisis center, and I thank you for that service and dedication for women in our community. You also served as a detective in the domestic violence and sexual assault division, so you understand how rape can impact a woman for a lifetime. In a similar issue in the Iolera Forum, you brought up the topic of hate crimes and vowed that your deputies would enforce hate crimes and send them forward when they are noticed to the district attorney's office for prosecution. However, when the topic of hate crimes is discussed, anti-female, gender-based hate crimes are rarely mentioned. Petaluma native Wayne Adam Ford was convicted of being a serial murderer of women. He walked into the Humboldt County Sheriff's Department in 1998, asked to be arrested before he killed again, then pulled out a severed woman's breast from his pocket. He was convicted of murder, but never charged for committing hate crimes against women. Women live in fear of being raped and murdered for no other reason than they are born female. I consider gang rapes, serial rapes, and serial murders of girls and women to be manifestations of misogynistic violence and should be recognized as anti-female, gender-based hate crimes. Will you commit to having your deputies record those crimes as anti-female, gender-based hate crimes and include this in your regular training for officers?
Yes, I think that all hate crimes are heinous crimes that should be prosecuted and should be charged. They think that there's a difference between prosecuting and charging. We can charge cases, the prosecutor charges them, but I think that all of those things should be, any crime that can be documented, especially if it's a hate crime, it needs to be documented as such against all individuals. So yes, I will commit to that.
Thank you. It's that there have been different cases in the county, even after the hate crime statutes was extended to include gender, that have not been treated as hate crimes. It's like it's not seen. So I'm glad that you're going to be willing to see this and include this in the training, because we've only had 3 anti-female gender-based hate crimes in Sonoma County since the time they started taking statistics. And I know that we've had more cases that would have qualified.
And I think beyond that, there are other cases across all hate crime categories that haven't necessarily been recorded as such.
Yes. So, okay, last question. If you are elected sheriff, will you commit to returning to the Sea Ranch Forum for an in-person meeting with our coastal community?
Yes. And if you mind, if I could add on to that a bit.
Sure.
You know, throughout my campaign for sheriff, I've committed to trying to touch every area of the county that I can. I only have one left. I broke it up into the zones for the sheriff's office. So I've been in zone 1, however, it was in Rio Neto. I've been in our north zone and in our valley. So I've been to every zone that we have and trying to talk about my campaign for sheriff. I think that it is really important for the sheriff to be with all members of the community. And I think that goes with the conversation that we had earlier about engaging with the community where they are. So not only would I commit to coming to the Sea Ranch in person, I would commit to going to Bodega Bay or Jenner or the Sonoma Valley or anywhere else, because I think that it's really important to do that.
So if you want to do your wrap up now.
Well, thank you for having me. I truly understand the the concerns of the people on the coast, especially from where they're located. And, you know, there's some residents in the county who believe that they are truly isolated. But I think that where you are on the coast, that is certainly true. It is important that you feel safe in the areas that you are, and as sheriff, I will work to ensure that you do feel safe. I think that that's something that's really important. As I said in my opening, public safety, keeping people safe is the job of the sheriff, and I will do whatever I can if I am lucky and honored enough to become sheriff for everyone to feel safe, because I think that's what they deserve.
Thank you. And thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, and so, okay, time to leave. Thanks.
All right, thanks.
Have a good rest of your day. Okay.
You too. Bye.